Hello, everyone. I know it's been a minute, but Stephen Covey here, and super excited today to introduce a new co-host who's going to be joining the podcast. So, want to introduce you to my younger brother, Britton Covey. Really excited to have Britt on the podcast. I know it's been a minute since we've had an episode, and there's a reason behind that. One of the reasons why is because I wanted to have a co-host join me, and I thought that there'd be no one better to have than my younger brother, Britton. So Britton is a current player in the NFL. He's the starting punt returner for the Philadelphia Eagles and also played his college career at the University of Utah. More importantly, he's an incredible brother, friend, dad, husband, all the above, and one of the best humans, that I know. And I thought, man, this would be awesome to have Britton on and kind of bring a different perspective than I have brought and be able to engage with these authors kind of in a different way. So Britton, welcome to Paradigm Shifting Books.
Yes, thank you. Glad to join on for the second season. If you haven't listened to the first season, part of what I've loved about this is I feel like everybody craves at some point. You sometimes you crave binging a TV show. Sometimes you crave like the trash TV or a movie or something, and then a lot of times you crave the intellectual kind of stretching. And I think for me, these podcast episodes, they're short, but every time I listen to one, it gives me a month's worth of just introspection and thoughts and intellectual stretching. So I've really enjoyed it, and I'm going to try and add to that as best I can.
So maybe for the audience to get to know you a little bit, what was so you've been in the league now for 2 years with the Eagles. First year in the league, you got to play in the Super Bowl, which is incredible. What was kind of your welcome to the NFL moment? I think I have in mind what you're going to say,
Yeah.
but yeah, maybe share that.
Right. Well, there's on the field and off the field welcome to the NFL moments, right? When you're a rookie, you kind of got to pay for random things and do random assignments. Yeah, I mean, I've played with some great players, and there's definitely been some on the field welcome to the NFL moments, but for sure, the welcome to the NFL moment was our first home game in Philly. I was still on the practice squad at the time, so I wasn't on the roster, and I pulled up, and they didn't really believe that I was a player. As you can see, I don't really look like one. You can't really tell that I'm only 5'8" here, 170 pounds, but yeah, I pulled up in my Toyota, and I was behind some of my teammates in their G-Wagons and stuff, and I don't think they believed I was much of a player, so I parked with the tailgaters in the tailgate lot. So that was definitely a welcome to the NFL moment.
Yeah, and it was funny because I remember it made like national headline news. It's like player gets denied entrance into the player's parking lot, but I loved it. I thought it also kind of embodied Philly a little bit, right? I think you earned some respect from the fans.
100%. Philly is the most passionate sports town in my mind in America, and part of what they want is they just want to see how much you can take, and they want to see, and if you can just keep going forward. And so I feel like I fit that pretty well.
There's no one, in my opinion, better to embody that than you. Actually, speaking of Philly and Philly players, one inspiration for me. So this just happened, in the last few months where I said, okay, I need to get the podcast rolling again. I really want to complete this project of highlighting these 40 books. And then I was actually listening to the Kelce brothers podcast. So Travis and Jason Kelce, and I'm sure people may have heard of that podcast called the New Heights podcast. It's like one of the biggest podcasts out there. And I that's kind of where the initial inspiration came from. It's like, why don't I do this with my brother? Like Travis and Jason just have a great time together. We know we're not the Kelce brothers. We're not trying to say that in any way, but just so shout out to Travis and Jason for the inspiration. That's kind of where this started for me. It's like I would get Britt on, but maybe Brett, I mean, what's it been like playing with Jason? I mean, literally a Hall of Fame center in the league.
Yeah.
What's Jason like?
Well, yeah, shout out to the Kelce brothers, right? We're a little less athletic than they are, maybe a little less charismatic. Jason is one of the most charismatic people I've ever been around. What you see with Jason, in public, in his podcast, that's how he is all the time. He's just hilarious. He's loud. He's unapologetically him, and I love it. But he is meticulous. I mean, he's one of the most detailed players I've ever played with, which is really cool. He could come up with game plans by himself. I mean, there were times when we even talked about having him call plays. We'd have a snap count system where the center would think about what play to call and he'd yell it out. That doesn't happen. Anyways, he's just a master of his craft. So as fun as he is in all moments, he is the most detailed player I've seen. So really cool.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about is, what prompted your interest, other than me being your brother? I mean, why, a lot of athletes have podcasts, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of athletes that do podcasts. So why the interest in joining a podcast like this? Again, we're not talking about sports, right? We're talking about some of the best books available for business, personal development, productivity, leadership. So what kind of prompted you to want to go down this route?
Yeah. Well, I think in and of itself, the fact that everyone and their dog has a podcast these days, right? And so we're just joining in on that. Every athlete seems like has a podcast, but every athlete's podcast is about sports, or the majority of them are. Obviously, they'll branch out to other things. I think that sports is a unique industry in the world that you can learn a lot from, and I think kind of having that sports perspective in a more intellectual-based podcast exploring these things would be really unique. And so, I think that would be really cool. And then the other thing is, I just think that in the world today, there's a big movement for self-help, leadership, understanding yourself and your life, and just with social media and the access you have to books and information, I think that it's become a popular topic. So I love the idea of kind of singling out 40 books that we want to talk about in different categories, and just letting people kind of get that craving, that intellectual craving.
It's a fun project that I've been excited about and passionate about for years. And I do think, again, another reason this makes sense, other than Britton being my brother and just loving him as a brother, is the fact that I think we bring totally two different perspectives to this, right? I've had more of a traditional corporate career, and Britt comes in as a professional athlete. And there's something about sports. And most everyone can relate to it, that it's so visible, right? Like the performance on the field, everything is so visible, whereas sometimes in a corporation, it's just not as visible. You can't go out and measure someone's performance the way you can in sports. So I think sports brings things, it brings things to the front in a way that nothing else can, and that principles that are applicable in a sports setting are absolutely also applicable in a business setting. It's just maybe more fun to talk about.
100%. Sports are so public, which can be challenging, honestly, as an athlete. Navigating social media these days is really difficult as an athlete. But I think that everybody sees the performance on the field in sports, and there's almost like behind closed doors, okay, what led to that performance? Was it the coach? Was it the players? Was it the scheme? Was it the strength staff, right? There's so much that goes into it that no one really knows about, that I think is really cool to talk about. And like I said, having that perspective of being around some of the best athletes in the world. I mean, I get to be with, obviously, Jalen Hurts, Jason Kelce. Lane Johnson's one of the best tackles in NFL history. Fletcher Cox is. And so I've seen a lot of it firsthand, which is really, really cool for me. Like a fly on the wall.
And part of a great organization,
yes.
The Eagles, right? The way that the Eagles is run, I mean, there's when you look at NFL teams, they're clearly one of the top
100%
organizations out there.
Mr. Lurie and Howie Roseman are incredible at what they do, and played for some great coaches as well.
Yeah, so awesome. Last thing we want to maybe talk about, wanted to ask you about, Britt, is around the influence that our grandfather has had on you. Again, one of the big reasons why I started this podcast in the first place was the influence that my grandfather, Stephen R. Covey, has had on me in my life, and just sparked an interest for me because of the 7 habits that led me to have just a deep interest in personal development, in leadership, in all these topics that we cover on this podcast. The reason it's called Paradigm Shifting Books is because my grandfather, we called him Papa. Papa would always talk about paradigms and how changing your paradigm will automatically result in your attitudes and behaviors shifting. So rather than focus on your attitude and behavior, focus on how you see the world. And if you shift that, then attitudes and behavior automatically flow. So that's why I just feel that idea of a paradigm shifting book is a book that you read. It shifts your paradigm, the way you see the world, to the point that all of a sudden your attitude and your behavior is different. So that's one of the biggest teaching my grandfather would talk about that just really impacted me. So wanted to ask you, of all the things Papa talked about, what has been, and it's hard to pick just one, but yeah, what's been something that's influenced you?
Yeah, well, I'm like you. What something really cool for me about Papa was, so he passed when I was 14, and I knew him as just Papa growing up, right? I knew he was, a big author and things, but I didn't really grasp or understand that. And one reason why I love books is because I've gotten to know Papa in a completely different way since he passed because of his books, his writings, his legacy. And I think that that's something so unique about good books is they're timeless. They withstand the test of time. It's a legacy you leave behind that everybody can read. And for me, one of the biggest teachings that he used to talk about was build on your strengths and organize to make your weaknesses irrelevant, whether that's in what you're doing yourself or how you delegate things to other people. And this is not in life skills. This is in your work skills. And so specifically with football, I've always been the smallest player on every team that I've ever played on, right? And the weakest. But I would take that quote from my grandpa and learn to view football almost in a non-traditional way and say, how can I apply my strengths in areas that are a little bit unique and organize so that my weaknesses aren't relevant? And I've seen a lot of success with that. And I think that you can apply that to your job in many ways, that when you're given a job assignment, see if you can reframe it in a way that builds on your strengths. There are non-negotiables, as Gallup, right, talks about. There are non-negotiables that you have to do, but for me, that's been the biggest lesson.
So. Yeah, that's very insightful. And Britton will not toot his own horn, but again, we're talking about a super high performer. Britton, last year in the NFL led the entire league in punt return yards, and he'll be quick to say it's not just him, but that it's whole unit. And that's essential to cover. But Britton's a great example of someone that, yeah, if you saw Britton in person, you'd say there's no way this kid plays in the NFL. But that whole concept you talked about is powerful. So, anyways, super super excited to have Britton on the podcast. Our end in mind with this podcast is we want to highlight 40 of the best books out there when it comes to personal and professional development, covering a whole range of topics. That we're not saying that these are the only 40 books everyone should read, but the idea would be if you read these 40 books, you would have a solid foundation for your life, from everything from personal development all the way to managing teams, to coaching people, productivity, strategy, culture. We're trying to cast the net far and wide as far as topics go. So again, these aren't the only 40 books, but 40 essential books. And with some of these authors, it takes time to schedule interviews and everything. So we're going to try and be as aggressive as we can on that. So we'll always do like a book preview episode, and then a few weeks later, the actual episode will drop. We're going to do some fun things like free book giveaways this season.
Yeah.
Maybe some Eagles tickets.
Hey, we'll think of anything.
We'll think of something. Excited to have you on, Britt, and it's going to be fun.
It's going to be a blast. Let's do it.